man, I've heard this a lot, even from really big churches that are bigger than ours. Sometimes people think like going all out for Easter or something, it's kind of like a fool's errand because they can't quantify. You know, man, big Easter attendance, the next week the attendance is back down. And so people say like, man, it's all, like, why do we put in all that effort? Like,
big show.
It's all for nothing. Attendance is right back down. And I just think, man, you're really missing it if that's the way that you measure it.
I think it's so, interesting because it's like, let's say you stop doing big days. I can almost guarantee you what's going to happen is week to week, you're still right. You may not feel it year to year, 2 years down the road.
Right.
You're going to start feeling it, man. Like, you may not see it going up. You're going to end up seeing it going the other way.
This is Breaking Barriers, where we help pastors and churches grow so that they can go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Breaking Barriers podcast. My name is Pastor Bobby and I'm here with Pastor Andrew today. And what we're going to do for today's episode is we just got through one of the biggest weekends of the year with Easter. And, there's probably 3 or 4 weekends that are similar to this throughout the year, Easter and Christmas normally being the biggest. And so I think it's a good time to kind of do some takeaways around, hey, what are takeaways around Easter and what we saw? And I think this probably can be applied to all of the big days that you have throughout the year. And so what I'm going to do today is I have kind of 5 takeaways from Easter. I'll let Pastor Andrew kind of react to them and just kind of generally talk about things that we can kind of learn going forward. Pastor Andrew, I'll throw it over to you. Maybe something to do on the front end is just to talk for a minute about the way that we view big days here at Mercy Hill. It's we've been using that language for about 3 or 4 years. We kind of doubled down on this probably 4 years ago on, man, if your attendance is naturally going to swell, which I'd imagine every church in America probably last weekend just with Easter,
right,
their attendance went up. If that's going to happen, how can you be more strategic around that reality? So maybe just talk about big days for a second.
Yeah, for us, it goes back to 2 influential figures in our church life. One is Rich Birch, and the other is Sean Lovejoy. Rich Birch has a book called The Church Growth Flywheel, and in it, he makes a, I think, fairly provocative statement. Your church doesn't grow on seasons, it grows on big days. And, that's not, I don't think his point in that is that's literally true, that your church doesn't grow in normal Joe Blow weekends or the fall or the spring. His point is just, you have an opportunity to really capture the most amount of new people, and for them to even come back over time, they're probably going to come on a big day. And that really has been true for us. Big days, yes, certainly Easter, Christmas, you mentioned. Other big days for us are Mother's Day, back to school weekend, these types of things. The weekend after Kids Week is always a big weekend for us. We call it a big day, and we strategize around them. The other conversation, just context-wise, came from Sean Lovejoy. You and I had a chance to connect with Sean. We had a church that we were very similar in size with in Tennessee. It was actually Josh Howerton's church back in the day before he went to Lake Point. But, and we were very similar size as them, but like their Easter goals really shocked us. I don't know if you remember that. Like we were just like, man, we're not really thinking about it that way. And so we started talking to Sean about that, and he had a good conversation with us in the green room at Exponential one time. And basically just said, hey, guys, how much are y'all going to bump? I don't know, 20%, 15%. And he's like, man, a lot of these churches are doubling on Easter because they're doing exactly what you said. They know there's going to be a natural swell, so let's try to double down on that in a big way and mobilize our people to invite and become missionaries in their community. I think it really has changed the game for us. I think it's led to a lot of church growth. And so, yeah, like yesterday at Easter, we didn't quite double, but not far off of it from the week before that, and maybe even the week after, it'll be back down. But our hope is that on that big day, there's going to be a lot of new people that become more familiar with Mercy Hill. They took a little baby step with Mercy Hill. They saw something that impacted them, and that's going to make them more willing to come back in the future.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things I've been doing recently, like for us at Mercy Hill, data is a really big deal, and trying to understand, hey, looking at attendance data, kids data, first-time guests, baptisms, giving data. The really unique thing in 2025 is, up until this point, a lot of organizations or companies, hospitals, insurance companies, they have people full-time that are just data analysts on their staff that have been trained in like, okay, how can I go through the spreadsheet, find patterns between data and stuff like that. With AI now, you can actually just do a lot of this on your own where, we may be able to see, you could see, like you said, where attendance goes from the week before Easter to Easter. It's like that's kind of fairly obvious. The attendance doubles or it's 1.5. But now you could plug in, big parts of data and, basically just use AI to say, hey, there's a pattern you didn't see before. So I've been doing that, and it kind of pulled out some interesting things from our Easter services. The first one, and a lot of these seem obvious, guys, but space leads to attendance. And what we mean by this is, the things that can hamper your growth would be space in your parking lot, space in your kid space in your auditorium. That's fairly obvious. But for me, I think the reason this is number one on the list for us is because myself and Pastor Randy on our staff, we were going through, hey, what have the last 4 or 5 Easters been like? How much have we grown on that Easter? And so for us, I think the numbers were everything between 9% year-over-year growth with Easter all the way up to this year was probably the largest we've seen, was like 30-something% over the previous Easter. And the thing that correlates with that the most that I could tell looking at all those numbers is the amount of space that we had going into that year. Mm-hmm. So this year, we've talked about this on the podcast, we've been working for 4 years to open up our new home and hub, our Ridge campus. And so this year, we had more space than previous years. And from what I can tell, it was kind of the biggest multiplier that we've seen at Easter. So when you think about the previous weekend to Easter, I think our attendance was 3,800 or something like that. And just doing all the math, it looks like the multiplier this year was like 2.15. Mm-hmm. So actually a little bit over that too. I think from my recollection, that's the highest number that we've seen. And, we can overcomplicate that, but I really just think it comes down to we had more space this Easter.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what you were saying about like the year-over-year percentage growth is Easter 2024 versus Easter 2025.
Correct.
Or Easter 23, right?
Right.
So you're not talking about like the week before Easter versus Easter. You're talking about year-over-year. And I think that's right. It's like, man, if we want to see a big bump in Easter attendance, not from last week, but from last year, we're going to need to make sure we have the space to accommodate that. And we say, well, I can't build a building in a year. Yeah, but you can make sure you have enough services, and you can push people to those services. And I think that's one thing we saw with our Breaking Barriers cohort this year was I think we had 5 churches and I mean, basically all 5 of them, we had them do like a little Shark Tank with us, about like their Easter plan. And man, they were so sharp and they did a great job. But I think every single one of them, we just did like quick math on a board and we're like, man, you don't have enough services. I mean, literally every one of them. And we had them adding services on Saturday or Thursday. And I mean, basically all of those guys came back with the highest attendance they've had ever on an Easter. And I think some of it was exactly what you're saying. They just had not, considered how many seats are going to be available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you said, you could take these numbers now after this Easter. Like you can look at, even if you're a church of 200, right? Like what happened over Easter? What happened in our kids' service? Man, if you counted cars in the parking lot, how many adults were in seats? And you can begin to do strategic planning for the future. Most churches, I would guess, listen to Breaking Barriers are growing. And so you can think about, hey, maybe a year from now, it's not a new building, but it's a additional parking lot, or it's, adding to our kids' wing. Or there will be times when you need to think about like, hey, 3 to 4 years from now, we actually need a new campus or we need a whole nother building. It's so simple. It's almost like right in your face. If you just have more space, you'll grow. The space ain't going to make you grow. But if you're already growing, it gives you the best opportunity to reach the most amount of people across one of those big days.
Yeah, I think that's important, just because that is true. It's like there's a lot of churches around this Easter that were half empty, and we know that just by the statistics of it. But for the growing churches, this becomes a very significant issue.
Yep, for sure. Number 2, engagement drives attendance. What we mean by this is, you think going into one of these big days, okay, the biggest thing for me to do is to encourage people to invite their friends. By far, evangelism, getting more people to come. But the number one thing that drives attendance, and there's a lot of reasons for this, and I don't think we'll ever be able to unpack what all the reasons are, but we have found this to be true. And the funny thing is, when I put the data into some sort of AI and it analyzes, no matter what data I put in, the number one thing that always comes out is like, hey, the biggest correlation between your attendance data is the amount of people that serve each weekend. And so for us, I would say over the last 3 years, more than inviter campaigns or anything like that, we do all that stuff. But the number one thing that we try to do, you've got to encourage people to serve and plug in, because it releases something in them, engagement with the church that they didn't have before, and that will drive attendance like nothing else that you have.
Yeah, the inviter culture is something that's unknowable, I think. So like when you plug it into AI, it's going to spit out something that's very concrete. Kids attendance, giving, volunteerism, what you're talking about here, engagement. So it's hard to say, inviter culture or not inviter culture, because it's just so unknown. But what we know, right, is that like, man, if you prepare the jars and you get people, to serve, then, it seems like God is going to honor that in a big way. And I think we would say it in two ways, right? We would point to 2 Kings 4. This is what we always say at Mercy Hill. God's going to bring you about the amount of people you are ready to receive, So if in faith we have the amount of volunteers to have X amount of number, and we got those people mobilized, it seems like a lot of times that's what God brings us, He doesn't have to do that. It could be more, it could be less. Just seems like what happens. So I think there's a spiritual component of faith, preparing the jars. And then the second thing, and this is just kind of anecdotal, but I think it gets to your point, is like I was talking to, we had a praise choir for this Easter, and 30 people, seedlings of what I hope in the future could be a blow your face off Sister Act type choir, which would be awesome. I'll get Whoopi Goldberg to come, but I think Jess was telling me like how many stories she got of people that were new to Mercy Hill because they were there because somebody in the choir was their neighbor or a family member. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like something about getting engaged and serving and all that. It just people just end up bringing their community with them. I don't know why it's exactly like that, but that's another one of those things that Rich kind of talked to us about a long time ago that we have found to be just so true. I think, man, what do we say? To hit our Easter goals, we needed 1,200 people to serve. Mm-hmm. I still haven't figured out the exact amount of people who serve, but we had over 1,300, quote, serving slots filled. Mm-hmm. So we had some people serve twice and different things, but we knew the numbers were something like that. For us to break our goal, we were going to need to see over 1,200 people jump in. And that's just kind of what happened.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I think sometimes people think about Easter and it just feels like, man, I don't know how to get my people to invite, or it just seems like one big weekend, like almost like people can be just a little discouraged, like we're not exactly sure what to do, but it's like, man, if you do anything around these big days, it's, man, encourage your people to get more engaged, because I think in many ways that's what these big days are all about. Even if a church is 100 people, man, if you've been going for the last 10 years, you have so many more than 100 people in your database. And a lot of what you're trying to do around these big days is like, man, you're just trying to get people to take a step of further engagement with your church. And the church language for this is like, man, your discipleship. If someone goes from just like watching what's happening, they attend, but now, like, man, they're treasure, and we know, like, people's hearts follow their treasure, and people treasure their time more than anything else. Man, I'm going to give my time to serve. I'm going to give money or whatever. It's like, man, their hearts are going to be way more engaged. And so, we can't just be like, well, I don't have the budget or I don't have this. It's like, man, if you just try to disciple people and, hey, let's take advantage of this weekend. Just don't come attend. Like, man, be a part of what we're doing. It's just going to really drive something. I think for us, something that we had in our favor is our college team and our student team were launching. And so they were viewing those volunteer teams like launch teams for a campus, And with our new campus launching, we spent 6 months before that campus launched really pushing people to serve. And I think just all of that work of that, and our campus pastors, like, hey, your number one job right now, like Pastor Jason, is to engage more people to serve and be on this launch team. I think that we saw it pay off because people's hearts were just more engaged around this Easter. Number 3, baptism really drives momentum. We don't baptize at like all of our big days, but I would say most of them that we do now. And I don't know if there's any stories that you want to share. We spent our staff prayer today just going around and talking about all these amazing baptism stories. And there's always these stories of like, man, people just decided to get baptized, or people have been thinking about it for a long time and they decided to get baptized this past weekend. It's very similar to serving, like someone serves and now they want to invite. Well, someone gets baptized. This is the best inviter opportunity they're going to have. And I think when somebody invites somebody to come watch their baptism, it's the most likely that someone's going to say, even if I don't believe, or I don't even believe in God, I'm going to support you and come watch you get baptized. It just creates a ton of momentum.
Yeah, I mean, the gas tank for momentum is baptisms, and what it represents, right? Like it represents like life change. Man, I've accepted Christ. I'm not who I once was. God, just snatched me from the inside out, took my feet out of the clay, mud, and put them on a hard rock. And, that kind of idea is just where the church, I think, just says yes. I mean, that's what that's what we're here to see, is to see people saved and changed. And so any of those stories that we can be capturing and make sure they're visible. I mean, we try to do that in our services. They're not an afterthought. I think you and I both have experienced churches where baptism is a little more funeral than wedding. And we try to say, no, it's more wedding, it's more celebration, it's exciting. We have no problem doing spontaneous baptisms. I think that's a really bad word for it, but basically ones that were not planned before that day. I mentioned to our congregation, there's not one example in the entire book of Acts where there's someone who was pushed off for days or months about their baptism. It's like, man, they got saved, they got baptized. I'm not saying there couldn't be a good reason to push that off, but I'm just saying, like every example we have is one way. We might ought to want to err that way at least. And so, we give people the opportunity right then, is if you've gotten saved, are saved. We even showed a video this Easter of a guy named Dave that was a major part of our church, serving, all that stuff, and he had just never been baptized, and it was kind of hard for him, thinking about, man, what are people going to think? I'm a leader. And then he went ahead and went forward in a spontaneous baptism setting. When we said the word delayed obedience has a name, it's called disobedience. Mm-hmm. And, you can just see the joy in the video, So people love it. We try to do it during worship, integrate worship in with life change and baptism. And I just think it's incredible.
Yeah, I had the chance. It was our last Easter service here at our Ridge campus. I was just going back into the sanctuary to be in there in time for the last baptisms, and people had already started getting baptized, and so they were walking out into the lobby like soaking wet in their clothes to go to the bathroom to change. So I opened the door, and there was volunteers behind them, so I just kept the door open, and there were so many people moving back and forth. I just stood there at the door and just held the door for about 20 minutes. And to watch people coming out that want to get baptized, and to watch the look on the volunteers' face that's able to counsel these people. And it's almost like in football, where it's like, man, you practice, but then to be there for the Super Bowl or be there for the playoffs and get to see everything that's happening. And I was watching people walk into the sanctuary that were about to go get baptized, and they just had this they were kind of scared, that look on their face. And then when they came out, they were just like smiling and hands raised. And man, they're never going to forget that. Like 20 years from now, they're going to be like, man, I remember on Easter 2025 at Mercy Hill when I got baptized. And so when we think about like momentum, man, taking advantage of that. And it's not even just the people getting baptized. It's the people watching the baptism.
Right.
It's the other people that should get baptized because they're watching that. It's the volunteers. It's the people that get to counsel them. Even our staff sharing about all the stories. I mean, I'm sure we left today just like super inspired. So it creates a spiritual momentum.
It's a Passover moment, it's trying to get the children of Israel to eat the meal every year so you remember going through the water and on dry land, and I think when we get communion's that way. I think baptism's that way. It gives us a chance to remember this is who I was, this is what God did, this is the moment that marked it. Very similar to a wedding, video that maybe you and a couple might get out every 10, 15 years, like looking back on, man, do you remember this and do you remember that? And it just helps kind of rekindle some stuff that was there. And the last thing I'll say is, like, man, one of the things I was caught by on Thursday night, Bob, of our services was how many people were being counseled 30, 40 minutes after the service. And that signaled to me these people were not ready for baptism. Obviously, we would have baptized them. Instead, they're getting saved, or they're being told you're not a believer, and that's going to help them either way. But some of those stories, every time we do this, are, they go back because God is like really drawing their heart. And then when they sit down with somebody one-on-one, they just lead them to Christ right there. They say the prayer right there. Mm-hmm. That is just incredible.
Yeah, and one kind of small tip, a lot of churches do this. We almost always do this when we do baptisms. We always want to do it 2 weeks in a row because there is nothing that can encourage somebody to get baptized more than seeing somebody else get baptized. Like being at our college service, seeing there was just people that, because we'll have the baptisms on camera where you could see them on the screen, and there was a couple girls that got baptized. They were like in tears before, like you could just tell like something was happening, and then to see their response afterwards, it's just like it creates something in people. And so there will be people that leave that service that are like, man, I should have got baptized. Man, I felt that draw. I didn't do it. And so that's why we always try to do it 2 weeks in a row, because there's going to be people that kind of follow up after that. So number 4, and man, I've heard this a lot, even from really big churches that are bigger than ours. Sometimes people think like going all out for Easter or something, it's kind of like a fool's errand because they can't quantify. Man, big Easter attendance, the next week the attendance is back down. And so people say like, man, it's all, like, why do we put in all that effort? Like,
big show.
It's all for nothing. Attendance is right back down. And I just think, man, you're really missing it if that's the way that you measure it. Okay, just because attendance is down the following week, that, hey, Easter didn't mean anything. So the point I put here is don't be discouraged when the next week's smaller, because we know it's going to be smaller, but you shouldn't just measure week to week. Mm-hmm. Some stuff that you say about like how churches grow.
Well, I think it's so, interesting because it's like, let's say you stop doing big days. I can almost guarantee you what's going to happen is week to week, you're still right. You may not feel it year to year. 2 years down the road,
right?
You're going to start feeling it, man. Like, you may not see it going up. You're going to end up seeing it going the other way, because I think that this principle of big days is so baked in to long-term. If a church is going to grow, year over year over year, there are certain things that have to happen. And one of the things that has to happen is there's got to be enough first-time guests, right? We have set it out on this podcast that generally speaking, whatever your average attendance is, not talking about Easter, also not talking about 4th of July, pick your average attendance in, end of September, mid-October, whatever. You need to be shooting in a year for about that many first-time guests, to come through. So if your average attendance is 1,000, then you need to have 1,000 first-time guests in a year. If you don't capitalize on these big days, you're not going to hit that. And if you consistently don't hit that, you're going to end up in decline. I mean, That's just, churches are like, man, we've been in decline for 10 years. What happened? Well, I guarantee you what happened. You stopped having first-time guests. Maybe that's not all that happened, but it may be kind of all that happened.
Right.
You just kind of stopped having first-time guests. And then the normal of attrition of a church, transfer growth, people leaving, people die, you weren't replacing that at a higher clip. And so, I just think this is so dead on. People that get cynical about the big show of Easter, the big show of Christmas, the next week, you don't even know when they come back or whatever. I think you're missing that sometimes those people show up 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years. I mean, we had a story in our staff prayer today of one of our staff members' father-in-law got baptized. She said he's come to nothing but the Easter service. What did she say?
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years in a row. And then this year is the year that God grabbed his heart. and that didn't happen last year, didn't happen the year before that, didn't happen, So I just think like it's not a week to week thing. This is more of a rhythm of a yearly first time guest numbers that we're trying to hit that end up producing the opportunity to grow year over year.
Yeah, it's not linear. Like pastors want to think, well, if Easter really made an impact, then they'd be back the week after Easter and the week after that. And it's like, no. Sometimes it's, hey, I only show up to Easter. And then the next year I go to Easter and the Christmas service. And then the year after that, I also go to the fall launch. And then all of a sudden I come back 2 weeks in a row. And it's just totally not linear. Like some people, yeah, they become a believer, they get baptized, they come to church every single week. That's not how most people's story is. People hang around, people have struggles, they got stuff going on in their life. And so just because you can't perfectly quantify it, it's not a reason to not go all in on these big days. And it's just, man, we got to kind of get above the clouds and have a more strategic perspective around this whole thing. The last one is, big days really matter the most when we can get people to take next steps. And it's the same thing. This is not linear either. Someone doesn't come to Easter and then all of a sudden you get them to go to our weekend or join a group, give, and go on mission with the church. It's just never going to be as linear as that. But it is very important that you are thinking about, okay, man, we 2X'd at Easter. So those are not all new people. It's a lot of people that are kind of on the fringe of our church. If we can use this as an opportunity to, man, how can we get them more connected through this experience? Like you think of something in culture, right? Where coming up to Christmas time, you're like, okay, I need to buy Christmas presents. I'm going to go on Amazon and buy presents and get them delivered or whatever. Well, let's say you do that for a couple of years, and then eventually you're like, man, I need to buy an Amazon Prime membership. And then before you know it, your wife's got Amazon stuff getting dropped off every single day at the house.
Not my wife. Can't stand the people driving down my driveway, dude.
But it's like, man, they've turned, right? They've turned like somebody that was here once to like, man, this person is a customer, they're a fan, they're all in. And so it's the same thing with us. We have a very straightforward flywheel. Like, man, we're trying to get people to come to the gathering and serve. We're trying to get people into a group. We're trying to get them to give. We're trying to get them to go and live on mission. And so coming out of a big weekend like this, we're thinking, how do we communicate a next step to them? How do we engage with them? How do we follow up with them one-on-one? I mean, there's just a million things we're trying to think about.
Well, I think that one of the things that we could have even said in the last one about next, the next week being smaller, certainly this one's the same way. I think it's worth noting that you and I have a real picture of two different types of quote unquote new people that come on a big day, right? Some of them are actually new. I mean, brand new. It's like they woke up Easter morning and were like, man, I didn't even know I was going to church today. Somebody invited me. They don't know Mercy Hill. They have no idea what that means. They're just like, they could have just as easily gone to whatever Baptist church, but their friend invited them. They end up here. They're brand new. The other type of quote unquote new person is a person who they know they're going to Mercy Hill on Easter. They just hadn't been for the 4 months before that. Right. They already knew. Like if you said like, hey, where's your church? They'd be like, oh, it's Mercy Hill. But they have never been to a weekender. They've never given anything. They don't come. You
wouldn't believe how many times that I meet a person like this that literally doesn't even know what your name.
Yeah, that's right.
There will be, they know who you are and everything, but they've come so few times. They are part of Mercy Hill.
It's so funny you say that, man. My dad had this little trick he used to always do, like when he would meet people. My dad's a big evangelist, trying to figure out if they needed to be evangelized or not. And the biggest thing he would do is when someone told him what church he would go to, he'd ask them the pastor's name. Because most of them have no idea. Now, if they were really a part of the church, they did. Right. But most people, like you're saying, just, man, Southern thing. I went on Christmas. That's my church. Well, we are not. Some guys, I feel like, talk real disparagingly about that person.
Right.
And it's like what Larry Osborne says, like, man, you can get mad at the sheep. You can get mad that you live in Babylon, or you can try to do ministry in Babylon. We live in Babylon. It's like, hey, dude, they're going to the ball field. Their kids, they're idolizing their kids' sports success. They're not here. Okay, we can get mad about that. Or we can keep trying to throw the hook out and keep trying, over and over and over. And that's what we try to do. And I feel like we've seen a lot of fruit with that, with people who slowly kind of come along. They slowly begin to conform. And then a lot of times there is a moment where it really begins to shift, but it's not overnight, like you're saying. It's not linear, like you're saying.
Yeah, I would say one of the kind of just most practical things we do with this is probably the week before Easter all the way till 4 weeks after Easter. We're very careful in what we're announcing and talking about. And sometimes it's even, you may have community group semesters, or you may have, when are you going to do your weekender, which is kind of like your onboarding for new people. We'll try to schedule that stuff around the assumption that there's going to be a lot of new people at Easter, so Easter weekend changes every year, right? Sometimes it's March 31st. This year was April 20th. And so sometimes we will build communication around, okay, let's do a weekender, 2 or 3 weeks after the Easter service. Man, a lot of those new people are not going to go to that, but some of them will. And it's like, man, for what we're trying to do to disciple people out of the, hundreds of new people that may come, and if one person gets baptized and says, I want to dive deeper, and they want to start serving and giving, it's like, man, the impact of that on your church, it's just like, man, you're never going to be able to calculate what a big impact that is.
Yeah, I mean, a discipleship-oriented church wants everybody to take another step, no matter who you are. I mean, me and you included. You're like, what is a spiritual step I need to be working on to take to become more conformed to the image of Christ, to be more mature, to have more fruit of the Spirit? And so I just think that's true for the highest, most hot spiritually people you have, and it's true for the coldest people you have. Some of them need to get saved, but like everybody else, it's like, man, there's a step they probably need to take, and we want to push them to maturity in that and present them that way to Christ. And so I think one thing to say too is like, it's not just that brand new person. A lot of the people that are coming around, maybe they're sort of starting to get more involved. Well, maybe they signed up to serve for the first time. Not ongoing. They've never been to a weekender, but they're going to, that's another opportunity we have. Hey, let's help you get into a serve role here, where you get around some more people, second community group, don't receive without giving, that kind of idea. We'll have a bunch of people out of Easter that probably start to serve more regularly, which is a great step.
Yeah. One last thing, and then we'll just kind of close this, is something that I try to think about, and you encourage our staff a lot with this, but the categories I think about it for this last one, because probably everybody's listening to this after Christmas, after Easter. We all want the same thing. Man, our attendance went up by X percentage. If I can just get those people to come back, or if I can get those people to be more engaged. Okay, there's some things that you influence, okay? So trying to encourage them to join a community group, trying to encourage them to serve, you only influence that, right? You don't control that. Like you could do a really good job. You could really kind of sell it and pitch them on it, but you don't. What do you actually control in this process? And so trying to identify, okay, what do we actually control on our end? And so like you encouraged our staff this Easter, well, if somebody signs up to get baptized before Easter, you can control getting back to them within 24 hours. Mm-hmm. Right? You're only influencing whether or not they get baptized, but you certainly can control how you're going to follow up with them.
Right.
And I think it's good in church ministry because everything is spiritual. So we're like, man, I don't control any of it. Right? I just try to influence, lead people the right way. But there are some things that you can control on your end.
Right.
The way that you lead and engage and follow up with people.
Yeah, I mean it's 99% a volunteer organization, and when you're dealing with a volunteer organization, you're going to be living in the influence world way more than the control world. But you can't control what you do, in terms of, and what you push, what you're asking people to do. But you can't, you have to influence if they're going to do it.
Yeah, man, any closing kind of thoughts on this?
No, I think it's really good. I mean, I think that as, you mentioned AI, as people get better with that, dude, I know there's guys that are way ahead of us with this already. Like, there's guys that are probably just cranking this stuff out. But I'm interested to see when AI can start to build these models where you actually can begin to have even a little more stats around what's driving what. I just think when we find that, it's going to be like, man, church. This is my prediction. Churches that went really hard on big days are different than churches that don't. Mm-hmm. Just flat out, there's just that may be like one of like the top 2 or 3 kind of things that has to do with growth.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, we hope this was beneficial for you. If you haven't, I would encourage you maybe to check out our Facebook group. This is the type of stuff that we're putting in there, and it seems like week to week we have more people joining, and we're always discussing stuff like this and sharing resources with one another. So have a great day.